Welcome back to another episode of Chasing Tech, and today we're going to dive into Elon Musk's acquisition of Twitter and how it will change the future of social media forever. If you're new here, welcome to Chasing Tech. On this channel, we explore new technologies and trends and how they impact the future of life in terms of happiness, health, relationships, and business, which is especially important in an era where technology is changing at a faster and faster rate every single day. If you're interested in seeing more content like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button below, as well as the notification bell to get a notification when new videos are posted. All right, now on to the main point of today's video, which is about how Elon's acquisition of Twitter is going to change social media forever. The points we'll be considering is Elon's public plans for changing Twitter, the Web3 principles that are going to have to come into play with these changes, and then some predictions and changes that are likely to happen with Twitter as a result. So Elon's already made some tweets to claim what he thinks needs to change on Twitter. He had a tweet that said, "Free speech is the bedrock of a functioning democracy, and Twitter is the digital town square where matters vital to the future of humanity are debated. I also want to make Twitter better than ever by enhancing the product with new features, making the algorithms open source to increase trust, defeating the spam bots, and authenticating all humans. Twitter has tremendous potential. I look forward to working with the company and the community of users to unlock it." So, three main points he highlights here from my perspective are number one, content moderation, number two, open source algorithms, and three, identity authentication. We'll be exploring these topics in this video. Some key things to note before we move on: Elon obviously is the owner of Twitter. I understand that. He's not the CEO, he still has a company to influence. However, he owns the company. So I think it's definitely going to have a play on how Twitter moves forward. I'm also making some key assumptions about Elon. Number one is that Elon doesn't think Twitter gives people what they want. And then number two, that Elon has a plan on how to better deliver what the people want via Twitter. And my guess and my assumption here is that Web3 principles are what the people want. That's why it's a trend in the first place, which is why we're going to overlay these principles on top of some of the plans that Elon is publicly sharing with us. And if you're curious to understand a little bit more about what Web3 principles are and how they impact social media, I call this Social Media 3.0. And I actually made another video, which I'll link in the description if you want to watch that first. But some key differences to note between Web 2.0 and Web 3.0 when it comes to social media is that there's little data privacy and no data ownership. The incentive structures are pushing platforms to prioritize profits. The content moderation that happens is very centralized and controlled by a select number of people. Monetization is mostly ads based, and there's no identity authentication unless you're a famous person. Where on the flip side, in a Web 3.0 social media, there is data privacy and ownership. There's incentive structures that prioritize maximizing value as opposed to profit. There's decentralized content moderation with certain safeguards in place. And there's also token-based monetization like TikTok's diamonds for live streamers. And then lastly, there is identity authentication for every single person using these platforms. So back to some of the things Elon mentioned he wants to change, we're going to overlay some Web3 principles onto them to see what practically is going to happen in the coming future. So about a week before Elon acquired Twitter, he released some tweets that said, "If our Twitter bid succeeds, we will defeat the spam bots or die trying and authenticate all real humans." So Elon has already specifically said in the public that he wants to do this. And the reason this is important to solve is that nowadays you can just type in your email address and create a password on any social media platform, pretend to be whoever you want to be. And that's why there's fakes and bots on social media all over the place. This problem is only going to grow worse and worse as AR and VR start to be adopted, and we end up having even more immersive interactions on social media. And the key challenge here for someone like Elon wanting to implement this type of a solution on Twitter is that in order to authenticate identity, there's some key things that are needed which require users to give away more personal and private data to a social media platform like their government ID, their facial scan, or their fingerprint. And that's not likely to happen the way things are currently structured on social media. And that's because the common person trusts social media platforms less and less with their data. A poll done by Investors Business Daily and their polling partner Technometric of Market Intelligence did a study on trust with social media platforms. The poll scoring indicated positive trust for any company getting above a 50. Most social media companies failed to go above a 50. TikTok was dead last with a score of 41. Second to last was Twitter with a 44.6. Snapchat followed with 45, and Facebook came in fourth to last with an overall score of 46.2. So, coming in at second to last on a trust survey, it's clear that Twitter has to make a lot of ground in terms of changing people's perspective of whether or not they can trust Twitter with their data. And until that happens, Twitter is going to have a lot of trouble being able to collect data that I think is going to be necessary to be able to authenticate identity and prove real humans are who they say they are on social media. But to me, it appears that Elon's already kind of caught on to this. That's why one of his tweets says Twitter DM should have end to end encryption like Signal, so no one can spy or hack on your messages. So the key message that Elon is relaying here is that he wants to solve this spying and hacking trend and this emphasis on the spying that is happening in social media today. So Web3 principles seem to already be in Elon's mind because he wants to include sort of element of data privacy and security. Now, he's mentioning just chat, but I think it could go even further to build trust with the community. For example, right now in the user agreements on Facebook and Twitter, you're agreeing to grant those companies non exclusive, transferable, sub licensable, royalty free worldwide licenses to any of your photos, words, and videos. This means that these platforms can use, copy, reproduce, process, adapt, modify, publish, transmit, display, or distribute your content in any way without notifying, crediting, or paying you. So, for example, any photo you post on Twitter, it's your intellectual property, sure, but you give Twitter the authority to do just about anything they want with the image, which is a lot of cause for concern because these companies can build a lot of profiles on their users and have all this data that they then turn and use for profitable purposes. And that may not align with what a user actually wants to happen with their data. So, the way things are done today as a result of those terms and agreements is social media companies are legally allowed to claim all royalties from your content, and they're legally allowed to process and analyze your posts in your profile. If we apply Web3 principles, you would actually instead split profits with social media platforms on any royalties collected from your posts. And you would also decide whether social media companies can analyze and process your posts and your profile. So, from my personal perspective, I think Elon would need to apply some of these principles to really solve the trust issues that are happening on social media, which would mean that all the power and control is shifting from a small group of people into the people that are residing on the platform, the common everyday users using Twitter. Is such a transition possible and something Elon's willing to do in order to guarantee that they can authenticate identities on social media? I guess we're going to have to find out and see. Another key topic that is what has caused this entire announcement to go viral online is the topic of content moderation. One of the biggest problems with content moderation today is that we can't seem to figure out an agreement on how content moderation is done. Some of the driving forces here are the way that social media platforms are incentivized. Social media platforms that run ads make more profits when the algorithm promotes content that is more likely to hold user attention. So basically, any social media platform that monetizes based on ads could run into a scenario where content that is harmful to society is going viral and therefore is creating extra profits for that company. How do you stop a social media platform from being incentivized to push harmful content? Well, this is a really tough problem. And I think we see a lot of stuff on the news about Facebook, Instagram, any social media running into issues where they're aware of some of the harmful implications of pushing and promoting certain traffic, but they just let it happen because of perhaps the profits that are in play. And really, to dig into the background behind this, I actually came across a paper written by some Wharton marketing professors and one of their doctoral candidates, and it's called Implications of Revenue Models and Technology for Content Moderation Strategies. Really, what it taught me is that there's a little bit of a seesaw between ad revenue and content moderation. One of the quotes that I pulled from the paper said, social media platforms running on advertising revenue are more likely to conduct content moderation, but with lax community standards in order to retain a larger group of consumers. This is because people want to be on social media and feel safe, but also be able to speak freely. So when there's certain things being posted, the virality of it draws in all these eyeballs, but maybe certain people are not okay with seeing certain content. And that's where there's all these problems that are being created. So, again, how do you incentivize social media platforms to do the right thing? There's really only two paths that I can think of. The first one is to attach revenue to a membership, so like a monthly subscription rather than to engagement. But to be honest, I don't really see that changing. So, I think the second solution I can think of is more likely, which is to demand change in the content moderation framework. And I know this has been an ongoing topic for years, and I'm by no means an expert, but here's a little bit of my theory and how I'm looking at the whole content moderation problem. One of the things Elon posted recently was a snapshot of the Apple App Store showing social media apps, and it basically depicted how Truth Social is beating Twitter and TikTok on the Apple Store. Elon's comment is that Truth Social exists because Twitter censored free speech. Now, whether you agree with Elon on that or not, it's important to note that not everybody feels the same way about how content is being moderated. And this is the exact nerve that Elon is striking when he talks about content moderation. It's the fact that not everybody agrees with the ways that content moderation is done today. And what I'm most curious to see is exactly how Elon decides to solve it. From my perspective, nowadays, social media companies moderate content using a centralized content moderation framework. It's basically like a small group of people or a king deciding how everyone in the community gets to see content, which is a big problem because not everyone's going to agree with that king or that small group of people making the decisions. Hence, all the problems we're having today with social media content moderation. The alternative that I think Web3 principles would promote is a decentralized content moderation framework where anything goes or everybody votes on certain posts. But from my perspective, I think this is a chaotic solution and it wouldn't offer much resolve whatsoever. We would basically be in the equivalent of a town square where anyone can just leave whatever trash they want to leave, and therefore nobody really want to be in that town square because it's so disgusting and filled with things that nobody really wants to see when they come to the town square. And that's why I think the most optimal solution is some sort of a hybrid where I would call it the hybrid decentralized content moderation framework. What would this look like? Well, I think it would start with a bare minimum standard for content moderation. So, this would mean anything that's absolutely illegal would not be allowed on the platform, and it would be purely from a legality perspective. One of the biggest challenges today with centralized content moderation frameworks is these social media companies speculate far beyond the black and white laws in society. They add a little bit of their own decision making in that gray area, which is completely understandable, but it still has this problem where not everyone agrees. Which is why I think the second component of a hybrid decentralized content moderation framework would include some sort of AI that is personalized for each user on the platform to moderate content based on that user's preferences. So basically, that AI would learn what that user is comfortable with seeing on social media and what it isn't comfortable with seeing. And it would do the content moderation on a person by person basis. So that way, everyone gets to experience this town square in a way that they are comfortable with experiencing it. Is this a perfect solution? Probably not, but that's okay. And really, the main point here is just to kind of walk through what it might look like to solve this content moderation problem as Elon is acquiring and changing the way Twitter operates. If you have any ideas yourself, I would love to hear them down below in the comments. So basically, the way I see it is there's a few options Elon has to pick from when it comes to content moderation. He could go more of the centralized approach and just make the decision at the Twitter level. He could go decentralized and let all haywire loose, or he could have more of a hybrid decentralized approach, which is a little bit of both worlds. So to wrap things up, there's a few things that I know we can all agree are going to change. There's going to be a new content moderation framework. Elon has publicly stated he wants to change this. There's going to have to be increased user data privacy and control because without it, Elon won't be able to change the way identities are authenticated and make sure that real humans are who they say they are on Twitter. And then lastly, he's publicly stated as well that identity authentication is going to be part of the future of Twitter. Some of the concerns that I think we all might have is although Elon's intention seems to make social media work for the people, all the people want different things. And I think this is the biggest problem with social media. It's a community and it's hard to make a decision on behalf of a community. And I think it's going to require a lot of collaboration and some sort of change in systems that involve regular collaboration from the community, as opposed to the centralized approach we've seen so far with social media platforms. So the biggest question is whether or not he will succeed in this acquisition. And I guess we're going to have to wait and see. Thanks for watching.